guys, what's going on? Andrew coming at you. In this one, we're going to talk about reverse culture shock, Sweden versus the US. See, I've lived in Sweden now so long that when I go home, I actually experience reverse culture shock. And this was the first time where I truly felt more uncomfortable being in the US than in Sweden, meaning like I felt more at home here when I'm here, and things make more sense to me than when I'm at home. But the strange thing is I don't completely connect with people and things here. And now, if I ever move back to the US, I won't completely connect with people there. So you get caught in this weird limbo as an expat because you can see things quite differently from everybody else. And this last time I went through some reverse culture shock, and the first thing I experienced has to do with things that go boom. I don't want to get demonetized on YouTube, so you're going to have to figure out what things that go boom means, and when people who are crazy in the head do terrible things with things that go boom. So the whole time I was home this last time in the States, I'd be going to getting dinner somewhere, lunch, gas station, and I'd be anywhere where there'd be a large group of people. And it would hit me for a second where I would look around and I'd go, wow, I'm having a great time. I really hope some crazy person doesn't come in with a thing that goes boom and start messing everything up. And the crazy thing is I was like thinking back, like, did I used to think like this as an American? Like, did I ever have this thought? And I realized that when I grew up in America, I realized that you realize that that's always a reality, that's always a risk, that something could always happen, but it becomes your baseline. So that's just when you're calm, it's always a possibility. So I actually think in a weird way, it causes more stress in America because you constantly have to worry about things that go boom. Maybe you don't have to worry about it, but you have to accept it as a reality and live your life, which means you're always just going to be a little bit hyper aware. It's like I was in a gas station and this guy had a thing that goes boom on the side of his hip and he's standing in front of me, and I just thought he was acting shady for a second, okay? I thought he was acting a little bit weird, and then he just left. And I was hyper aware of the guy. I looked around because in Pennsylvania, you can wear a thing that goes boom on your side without needing any type of extra license. And so, yeah, it was interesting. Probably the guy was just, there was something he didn't want to pay for, but I was just made to be way more hyper aware than I normally am. Number 2 has to do with charity. Now, it's interesting because I used to think about like Americans being way more charitable than other countries. But it's just the experience of charity and what charity is. You know, I've seen so many examples of charity. And one thing that's kind of annoying in the US right now is every time you go to pay for something, they like guilt you into trying to donate to charity. And like, listen, I love donating to charities and like it's a good thing to do, right? But at the same time, it's like I'm buying a t-shirt at Dick's and they're like, you want to donate to these kids? I'm like, okay, sure. But then every single place I went to, they were always like, do you want to round up and donate? Round up and donate. And see, I've lived outside of the US so long now that I realized like, wait a second, what's with all these charities, man? Like, isn't this what our taxes, I'll say it again, taxes are supposed to go to, right? Well, I shouldn't be donating money to all these causes to take care of sick people. It should be taken out of our taxes. And then you realize something. You realize Jeff Bezos is floating around in a $500 million yacht, and they are trying to make the middle class feel guilty and try to guilt us into spending more and more money trying to fix problems that taxes should pay for. Sorry, but in all seriousness, like it does blow my mind. That in the U.S. we're so charitable. We're asked to do charities. We do so many charity things, but yet we don't realize that a lot of these things are common sense. And this is where I realized that in Sweden, like we don't have as much charity, and maybe we're not as charitable, but that's because the tax money is actually going to take care of sick people and taking care of people that are in need. Obviously, there are charities here in Sweden, and people do donate, and there is a need for charities for countries that don't have these things set up. But man, in America, do they want to guilt you into giving you more and more money? And that goes off of number 2. The number 3, the next reverse culture shock thing that I went through is realizing that America is capitalism run amok. And see, when I grow up in America, you're just around the capitalism constantly that you do not realize it. And what I mean by that is someone is constantly trying to sell you something. Like there's more commercials and more ads in the United States than anywhere else. So if I'm watching YouTube or anything else in America, I'm getting way more advertisements. Someone's trying to sell you and upsell you everywhere. It's constantly people out there trying to get your money. And you can see it the way the societies are built. Because if you look at Europe, they built their societies around public transportation in a sense, where America is built in cars and you drive down the highway and it's just stuff to sell you, malls, stores, which is crazy because if you look at the structure of the US now, a lot of these places are going to have to close down because people are shifting to online shopping, which I'm sure is going to happen in Sweden as well. But it's just, what I mean is, I think the things in Europe seem to be a little bit more pretty, where like in the States, it's a lot of like buildings and warehouses and selling you stuff, that I just feel like America is the result of capitalism run amok with no checks and balances, where if you look at Europe, it's capitalism run amok, but with checks and balances, meaning I think that they reel it in a little bit here in Europe, a little bit more, and it's just something you don't realize. But when you're in the States, you're just constantly exposed to it all the time. It's literally like, I feel like when you exist in America, you exist just to consume things, if that makes sense. It's like they want you to just keep buying stuff. Like, you're gonna get a job and just keep buying a bunch of stuff that you do not need. So yeah, that's just something I think of. That would be number 3. Number 4 has to be how easy you can get lost in the bubble. And this is another reverse culture shock, just something I think about. So these are all things I never thought about before that I thought about this last time. And talk about getting lost in the bubble is that America is so large that when we watch news in America and we're in America, you know, there's so much stuff happening that they don't even have to focus on anything international. And so we don't get a lot of international news because there's so much happening in America constantly that you realize it's easy to get lost in a bubble. And suddenly you just feel like there isn't another way. And I think that's the other thing I really thought about being in the US this last time. Is like, when you walk around and you've lived in Europe and you realize that there is another way, like things could be better and we could easily do it like this, but you can't even talk about it. And so many people, it's so far away from them because they've never lived in another country, that we get lost in a bubble. That like, this is just how America is. Like, the healthcare is just really, really expensive. Insulin is just really, really expensive. And you just have to struggle as soon as you are born and survive. And yes, you can have a nice life, but you're born into debt, and you got to keep working, and you got to keep working. You get caught in the rat race. But when you leave the United States, you're not in the rat race. You can look at it from a different perspective, and you realize, man, everybody's just running around in this rat race together, just working, spending money, lost in the bubble, where we can't even talk about universal health care. We can't talk about making it easier to pay for university because people are so lost in their bubbles that they don't even begin to understand that there's another way to do things. That's something that blows my mind. And then the last 2 really has to be like, one is just everything's louder. Like when I'm speaking English here in Europe and I'm speaking English in Sweden with people, I tend to talk more quiet, and I tend to not talk over people as much. But in the US, when I speak English, I tend to talk over people all the time. So when I come back, I'm talking over people. And it's just because when we're speaking American English, it's like someone else's conversation. It's like they start talking before you finish the sentence, like a couple sentences before. So it's almost like we're talking over each other. So it tends to get more loud. Where here, my voice tends to get more quiet, and I don't do talking over people nearly as much. The other thing I noticed, and this is going to be number 5, or I think it's number 5. I might have lost track of the numbers. Sorry about that. I'll fix that later on here. But the last thing I got to say talking about this is simply put is TVs. Like, there's TVs everywhere when you go to like a sports bar or restaurant, but there are like be 50 million of them. And there's like tons of stuff playing on the TVs. And I just don't experience that in a sports bar or restaurant in Europe nearly as much. Like, yeah, I can go to some and they have TVs, but I mean like a regular place in the US that's not even a sports bar, I feel like has more TVs than some of the restaurants and things that I've been in Sweden that have TVs. So it's just, it can be overwhelming. It's a lot of stuff. There could be like 50 different sports going on at the same time. That's a reverse culture shock thing. So these are all things that I learned and was exposed to. I guess most of the ones that really impacted me this time were the things that go boom, and some of the others, the fact that you can be lost in your own bubble here in the U.S. So this is mine. If anyone else has ever experienced reverse culture shock, I would love to hear your opinions, and please put it in the description below. And if you like this, guys, it'd be awesome if you could go ahead and subscribe. Sorry I haven't created a video in a little while. I was in the US, I was changing jobs, I had a lot going on in my life, so that's why I took about a month off. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Hero!